You don't have like a quiet on air sign outside for your...
Nope. This is part
raw.
part of it.
This is raw.
This is part of it.
I like it.
Okay. Ready?
I am.
Here's to good friends.
Cheers.
Cheers. Cheers. That's sort of an oaky afterbirth.
What was that?
She did tell me to get a beer and some cheese fries over at Eskimo Joe's.
That's very nice, lovely. I only hope you feel this way when I'm done. Because I could destroy this night in 2 seconds.
Why is that funny?
Well, I think it's a bit funny to be trying to define nothing.
Smooth as a bourbon on a summer day. Strong as a peated scotch in the winter night. This is a fair warning. The Catholic Man Show is about to begin.
Slap some bacon on a biscuit and let's go. We're burning daylight.
Welcome to the Catholic Man Show. We're on the Lord's team, the winning side, so raise your glass. Adam Minahan here, sitting in studio with David Niles. We are sans Juan this evening, and Jim.
It's a lonely day.
But we have a good friend, a guy who has come back for a third time. Shockingly.
Is this your only
Against
your third
all odds.
or your fourth?
Against all odds.
It's third, right?
Your third.
Okay.
Diaconate. Erotic Love.
And so that was okay. I thought maybe there was another one in there.
No, he waited until he was ordained because he needed extra graces to come onto our
I need
show.
all the graces.
He learned the first time, like, I'm not doing that again.
Without.
Not till I got help. I need backup.
Exactly.
Deacon Garlick, it's wonderful to have you on the show again.
Thanks, guys. Happy to be here.
Yeah.
We're excited because this is a follow-up to a show that we did, I don't know, maybe
Sort
a
of.
couple months
Well,
ago.
we like mentioned it. We actually ended up talking about it. We did end up talking about it for a while.
I think on one of the breaks.
Yeah.
On Hell.
Oh, yes. Okay. I thought you meant the one where Deacon was here last. No. Yeah, so we did an episode on Hell a while back.
Mm-hmm.
And then we said on that episode that we were reading the book at the time and that we would do this episode when we were done.
With Deacon Garlick when we were done. So we're fulfilling all of our promises, contrary to a episode recently where we said that I lied. I'm not lying this time.
Did you lie?
Well, no, but Deacon Garlick thought that I did.
Oh, yes, the joke.
Yes.
That was very funny. I'm really glad I was there because it wasn't just Deacon Garlick.
I retold that joke to other people, but as a funny story that happened to Adam.
Right.
I was like, guys, you got to hear this funny story. So my good friend Adam told me this funny story about his life.
You will never believe
true.
what happened to him with his son.
And there I am having a drink with him one night in which he explains to other people while I'm present that he told people this joke one time.
That he ripped off my dad.
Yeah.
Which I think
it was eye-opening.
Is really actually a testament to my understanding that it was a joke. Otherwise, I would not have brought that up in front of other people.
You definitely thought it was a joke.
I definitely did.
That's why it's so funny, because you did not convey the joke very well, which makes it funnier. It does make it funnier, like when people think it's real.
I mean, I guess.
Yeah,
I mean even today in the Chancery hallway, he told me a story, and I asked him, like, "Is this a joke?
Is this a joke?"
Like, I have to actually ask now, right?
Yeah.
Which is fair enough.
Like, have you ever met my dad? I don't know.
Yeah,
You probably met him. If he ever tells you a story and it starts off with "This is a true story," just be ready.
It's not.
It's not a true story.
Probably
it's
not
a joke. Yeah.
What the only way to know for people who don't know my dad is to kind of keep an eye on my mom, because she'll be in the background, either like shaking her head no,
right,
or going, shaking your head yeah. I'm like, believe it or not, it really is true.
Well, when Adam told me the story, I had no Haley to look at,
right,
to understand whether I was being lied to by my good friend Adam.
Fair enough.
I said, super funny.
Super funny. Before we get into our whiskey, I do have a something that we need to cover really fast.
Okay, this sounds
a little bit more serious.
Yeah.
I'm asking for prayers of our listeners for a patron member of ours and a fellow Catholic Man Show listener, Ryan Ullman. He has been experiencing some health problems and is with his wife. They've only been married for like 2 years, and he's in not doing well. So we ask for your prayers for him and his family. Alleman, yep. Ryan Alleman. For him and his family.
Very good.
So I wanted to make sure to
say
do
a
that.
prayer for him. And for his recovery.
For his health, yes. So tonight, Deacon, we are not drinking a peated scotch, which is typically our go-to. We're drinking a bourbon, so we'll see how this goes. Pot Still Willet whiskey. It is a sweet bottle. First of all, it looks like a pot still.
It is a sweet bottle. I like it.
It is a great...
looks Eastern. It has like an Eastern look to it. But yeah, it's a pot still.
Right. So it's Willet Reserve, very well known, been around for a very long time. Let's try it. We're on the Lord's team.
The winning side.
So raise your glass. Cheers.
Cheers to Jesus.
Very dark color and deep amber tones. Apple, tart, honey, hay, and a little bit of buttered popcorn is what I'm getting on the nose.
Yeah, I think it tastes good.
Okay, so you have the Jim.
Is it on the yummy scale?
The yummy
Jim,
scale.
I can't borrow the yummy scale.
Yeah, okay.
That's Jim's.
Mm-hmm.
Mine's just it's good or not. But this is like the sweetest thing I've had to drink that's alcoholic in a long time.
It is sweet for bourbon.
Wow.
Brown sugar.
Yeah.
Kind of coat the mouth sweet.
Danish.
The nose, I was not expecting it to be so sweet, just based on smelling it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's a lot of like there's like a lot of candied fill in the blank on the way down. That's fantastic.
It'll be good.
I like it. Do they put sugar in that?
Probably so.
I think it's a good move.
So, Deacon, so recently we have got a few people together to read at least one book thus far, The Inferno. But we've
made it through one book.
We're attempting to go through a whole series of great books together. One of them that we've finished already is The Inferno, which we've discussed. This is what we're going to discuss this evening. Maybe let's start off with just like the importance of reading books together. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Because you have a heart for this.
Yeah, reading books together and reading great books together, right? So, yeah, I think that when people talk about the great books, that kind of means something now today. It's usually a particular curriculum of text that they look at in the Western civilization. The 1950s, people tried to actually put together a big set that you could buy, right, that had these great texts. And at the end of the day, what they're trying to look at is like, what are the books in Western civilization, if we want to use that term, that were the most impactful, right, that did these things. And so, it's Plato's Republic, it's these things, it's Aristotle, it's St. Augustine, St. Thomas Aquinas. And one of the things they were trying to do is that a lot of people's educations now don't engage any of these texts. They don't engage these great ideas.
Right.
You can kind of look at it as there's this wonderful conversation that has happened, over thousands of years, and modern education seems to have just kind of stepped in and cut that off.
Mm-hmm.
And so you see a lot of people now that, how do I engage in that education? I can't go back to school. I can't restart, my elementary and high school. So how do I do this? And so what ends up happening is like, okay, well, let's read these great texts together, and this kind of serves as a supplement to our modern education. So I think that, reading this is really good. We come together, we pick these books, and I think that reading them as a group and like a fraternity is really important because a lot of these books are difficult. They're difficult to read.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times they also presume that you have a certain level of education.
Sure,
right?
Sure.
And that you've read other books.
Or that you know about some of the other books, because inside of a lot of these great works, they reference each other.
Correct.
And you don't get it. And so, like, the more I've read these, specific books, when they make reference to the other ones, occasionally I say, oh, I know what he's talking about right there. And all of a sudden it's like, wow, I would not get the context of that if it hadn't been for the fact that I read this other book.
Which I think that what you're experiencing is one of the great fruits of this, right? That you yourself are reading a text from some master, and you're being able to track what the argument is, what the cultured argument there is, right? Which is another reason why it's important to read the great books in chronological order, right? because they're dialoguing with one another, right? There's this dialogue
didn't
that's
think about
actually
that.
going through that, right? So when you start to read, you're like, oh, like most people start with Homer. So we're going to read Homer. Why? Well, because in the Greek world, he kind of sets that tone. But then when you get to Socrates, right, and Plato, they're going to be talking about Homer a lot, right? They're going to be talking about what did Homer do correct? What did he do wrong? In the Republic, Socrates is railing against Homer and his poetics and what he's done to the Athenian youth. That doesn't mean anything to you if you actually haven't read the Iliad or the Odyssey.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of join this
Sure.
journey, right, of actually going through these texts. And I think that because the great books tend to pull out great themes, right? They pull out these, what we would call perennial truths. It's like, how do you love your family? How do you be virtuous? How do you love God? What is true religion? These kind of things. Then I think what ends up happening is that it can form you, and then taking those deep conversations and engaging them with that kind of iron sharpens iron with other men is really where I see these benefits really come to the surface.
So yeah, I hadn't thought about reading them chronologically. I think that's a really good idea. My approach when I started is just kind of like what I did, was that I realized my literature, like who am I as a literary student? Well, I'm, like a second grader or something. So I just pulled from John Senior's 100 or 1,000 good books list, and I found where someone had gone through them and recommended, like, at different ages. Okay,
Right.
like from 5 to 7, these are good books. And so I just started at the little kid books of his list and started reading there, because they're very delightful, but just these easy to read stories where they weren't over my head.
No, they're good.
Yeah, so one of the things that's really good about these getting together also is how we meet. On the other side of the break, the intention of having good food, good drink, how that facilitates good conversation, I think is important when gathering together. So we can talk about that, and we can jump into the Inferno.
Good.
When we get back. We'll be right back.
That's loud.
I forget that Juan
hear
normally lowers that for us.
I mean, we can talk about it on the other side of break if you want, but yeah, it depends on, like, there's a different pedagogy, right, for an adult approaching the great books as opposed to a child. Like, a child can't sit down and start reading Plato.
Right.
So with a child,
that hadn't even occurred to me.
Right. So like an adult great books program like we have in the Diaconate, or that a lot of places are running for adults, are going to start you like with these great texts that are kind of deeper waters. But if you're coming at a child, then yeah, it's like fairy tales, Aesop's fables. It introduces you, it's almost more by theme and concept and what's palatable for that age, right?
Yeah. It was still good to read those books a lot, because they were just very imaginative, and I think the average man especially simply has ignored his imagination as a faculty of his as a person, right? And to sort of read some of those like just delightful short fairy tale books,
and sometimes not even delightful, right? Like Grimm, right? Like, so like Brothers Grimm.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I've been reading those kind of books to my daughter, and I think they're formative even for me, because I didn't grow up reading these texts. And there's like, you can start to see the beauty because they start to introduce these concepts of virtue and et cetera. You can see that young mind, that young imagination start to wrestle with them.
Like the book Little Lord Fauntleroy.
Right.
It's just what a delightful little story. It's just so nice. You read it and you're like, wow, I feel great. But I mentioned this book when we were doing our study. I want to just say this before we keep recording, called The Water Babies. That book is absolutely a child's version of Dante's Inferno.
Really?
I'm not sure. I need to go back. It's written by Charles Kingsley. I'm not sure if he is favorable or not towards Catholics. There is like one comment in the book sort of towards the end that makes it like I can't tell, are you like disparaging the papacy here, or just acknowledging that there have been bad popes? It's hard to say. But for them, it's full of contrappassos of people suffering for the things that they didn't like. Very specific. Like there's a guy who's trapped in a chimney because he was a chimney sweep and made his, like, he had a boy who would really go into the a full-grown man couldn't go into the chimneys, to sweep them out. So they all had boys, but he was just really mean. And so he was trapped in a chimney. His arms were in there too, and he had a pipe in his mouth that he was like drawing on all the time, and it was never lit. And the whole time he just kept trying to smoke his pipe, and he just can't because it's not lit, and he can't get his hands out, and it would rain on him. So it's just the whole book is full of stuff like that.
Huh.
And it was a really funny book for adults.
Yeah, you said you and your wife were just like
we thought it was hilarious. It was hilarious. The kids didn't get it,
right?
But
I feel like that about Winnie the Pooh.
Really?
Yeah. Have you read Winnie the Pooh at all?
No.
Yeah. The first couple are a little difficult to get through just simply because of how he structures a story. It's like a story inside a story.
Uh-huh.
So it's like a story about the dad telling his son a story about Winnie the Pooh. So some of the grammar is a little clunky in the beginning. But it's like that because it's like he's basically just a Sadia incarnate, and he's profoundly obtuse, and he tries to think these ideas, and as an adult you're looking at that idea as the dumbest thing you could ever do to try and solve that problem. The kid doesn't get it. The kid's like, I wonder if it'll work out, right? And the adult's just like laughing already, knowing where this is going to go, right? And seeing like Pooh Bear's kind of misconstrued logic, and it's one that I actually really enjoy reading to my kids.
Nice. Okay. Shall we? Anything else? No? Okay. Welcome back to the Catholic Man Show. I'm David Niles, here with Adam Minahan and Archdeacon Harrison Garlick.
Lord Chancellor himself.
This is where I walk out.
Yeah. Okay, so big, like as we were talking about, you're a big proponent of the great books.
He's a tutor of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, yeah, you
you
help teach the great work, the great books program within the diaconate. Is that
Correct.
the right way to say it?
Through the Alcuin Institute.
Through the Alcuin Institute, but as a part of the diaconate program. Are you are you a tutor?
Yeah, that's the title they use. It's like professor
for the Alcuin Institute.
Is tutor, yeah.
So we're going to be talking about one of these great books today,
right?
Dante's Inferno. Before we dive into it, the reason I had never read this book is because I had kind of heard that there's a lot going on in this book. A lot of historical context, specific characters who did certain things in history that if you don't know the history of these characters, a lot of it's just going to go over your head.
Right.
So I never read it. And then when you said, hey, let's get a group together, because it's a book that you're very familiar with, and several of the other guys in our group had also taught the book before, right? And so it was a really great opportunity to be able to read it with everybody. It was really great. But if you don't have that opportunity, what would you say to somebody like, you have no idea, you're just going to pick up this book and read it? Should you try to do it together? What's your recommendation?
Well, I think, taking a step back, I think we have to be careful with the great books in a certain way, because I think that, is that good?
Yep.
So I think that the great books can be very misleading and be a trap as well. They on themselves are not sufficient for wisdom. And what I mean by that is, if you look at the great books curriculum, it's always going to include Machiavelli's The Prince. It's going to include Marx's Communist Manifesto. It's going to include Freud. It's going to include all these things that are actually not good, but they're in the great books curriculum. And so one of the things that you'll see is that there's a wrong way to approach the great books, which is, I've read all these books, right? I've read all these great thinkers. They all disagree, right? Because once you get to the moderns, they start arguing with one another, and the modern philosophers and et cetera. I've read everyone, and they all disagree, and you come out the back end a cosmopolitan relativist.
Right, so you make it up for yourself.
Right, so it's I've read all these people, and people might have arguments on Facebook, but I've seen the arguments of philosophers, and there's no truth.
Mm-hmm.
So I think one thing to really point out here is that the people who do the great books well, and sometimes even shun that title, are those who understand that inside their curriculum, it's Holy Mother Church and Christ, right, who is that light, that then is that standard of truth, and that's what we apply to the great books to get things out of it, right? So whether you're reading Plato's Republic and trying to understand what's true in here, what's not, like what's the filter that I use, or you're reading like The Prince or Communist Manifesto, whatever you're reading, he has to be that light. And it's through that then that we can actually engage the great books, right? Because if not, I think you can go astray on them. The other thing too is about the chronological order is that I think Dante particularly is very difficult to read if you haven't come to the table with a lot of that education. And I don't mean to like disparage people from reading it, but the problem is that, you know, he assumes you know Greek and Roman mythology. He assumes that you're classically educated. He assumes you know scripture really well.
Which was the education at the time.
Correct.
That was the, so his audience would have been.
Outside of scripture, he pulls from Aristotle more than anyone else, right? And then, even if you're very well educated in all those things, it's like, oh, by the way, here's a gigantic dose of 13th century Florentine politics that no one knows, except for people who study Dante.
And nobody would know if it hadn't been in this book.
It's like, well, who's this guy that's in hell? It's like, oh, well, that was the mayor at the time that Dante was there, and Dante didn't like him, so now he's burning in hell for this sin. It's like, do we know anything about him? Nope. We only know that he's in that hell, right? And so,
the only reason the Guelphs are relevant today is because, like, well, you need to know what Dante's talking about in this book.
Exactly. And so so that can be a little daunting, I think. So I think that, finding someone that you can read it with, I think that fraternity is really big, someone that can lead you through it. I think also not getting frustrated, because Dante particularly has multiple different layers. And like what I usually tell people at the beginning is, don't worry about the Florentine politics. Like, you can get the moral thing out of it. Don't worry about trying to figure out who everyone is and etc. Like, you can set that to the side. Pick up on the biblical allusions. Right, you'll get those.
Sure.
Greek mythology you can kind of pick up as you go. Right, just wait, who's this character? Because it's never like super in depth. It's just like, who's this god? Who's this creature? Why are they used here? A little bit of scratching of the surface of Greek mythology can get you there. But then, I think you've got to find someone to kind of study with and build that fraternity and discuss these things. I mean, the natural method of learning is question and answer.
Sure. Yeah, and I think so the edition we went through was the translation by Mark Musa.
Correct.
Which is also an important thing.
Also, that's important. Yeah, you need to get a good translation. I know Anthony Eslin also, and it was nice that in our little group we had the different translations, because it's not so much the translation that does make a difference, but it's the notes that they have. So, like, even if you don't know anything, you still actually could get a lot out of the book by yourself, just because there's all these notes. So like if you are just, I don't want someone to be discouraged, like, oh, I don't have a group to read it with, I guess I'll just never read that book. No, actually you can. And Adam, what was the book you got that really was like a companion to go along with it?
Tan put out a book. It's by a priest. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's Avoiding the Inferno.
Avoiding
the Inferno.
Okay, like don't go to hell.
Right.
Gotcha.
But it's published by Tan. If you look that up.
Okay.
It's a great companion.
So I didn't want to spend too much time on that. That was a long time already. But so let's just jump into the book. Deacon, what is the setting?
Right. So Dante's Inferno, right? He writes the Divine Comedy, or just the comedy, and the general premise, right, is that people make distinctions between Dante the poet and Dante the pilgrim, right? So the author, and then he's the protagonist of his own story. And so Dante the pilgrim, right? He very famously finds himself lost in the woods, right? At the beginning of the text, he's wandered away from the straight and narrow, and kind of a very clear allusion to his life falling into disorder. And so then he's going to go on this journey. He's going to go on this journey through hell, and then up through purgatory, and then finally ascend into heaven. And so the Divine Comedy, has, the Inferno, purgatory, and paradise, right? And he's going to go on this journey. It's not a private revelation. It's not like a mystic. It's not like this. He's not trying to describe the landscape of hell. I think people get wrapped around the axle on this and kind of confused about like what he's trying to do, and like this is not what the church teaches about like this particular thing or whatever. So I think like if people say, well, like what's the general purpose of the text? Like why did he write this? I think that a good way to discuss it is just simply it's a catechesis in virtue, is what it is. It's a catechesis in virtue. I mean, I think that no one, outside maybe St. Thomas Aquinas in a systematic way, but when it comes to like a poetic way, I don't think anyone sits here and can describe the soul and why the soul falls into sin, right? Because we have all these dialogues. He's going through hell. He's talking to people that are in these circles, and he's talking with them. Why are you here? And I think he masterfully kind of unpacks why souls choose evil and why they do that. And then when he goes to purgatory, he'll do the same thing, but like, why are they seeking this purification? How are they trying to root this sin out, right? And then when he gets to paradise, right, he's having these same things about how they've won the race, how they've done these things. So I think it helps to understand virtue, and then throughout the text, because of how he structures it, it really can serve as just like a general catechesis and examination of your own soul.
Who is Virgil, and why is he important in this story?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Dante, through this, right, Dante, the poet, is this just brilliant, brilliant man. Dante the pilgrim is kind of this sheepish, he's swooning in hell, he's passing out, right? He's making wrong decisions. So he needs a guide. And so when he's in the dark woods, he runs into Virgil. Virgil is the famous Roman poet. And so Virgil also famously in the Aeneid wrote his protagonist also goes through the underworld, right? He's also Italian. So there's like deep connections, I think, between them, and we can parse that out more if you want. But he's the guide, and so he'll take him all the way down through hell and then up through purgatory. And then when he gets to purgatory, Dante comes from limbo, which is part of hell, and so he's technically damned, and so he can't go into heaven. And so then
Virgil comes from limbo.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
And then Virgil hands Dante over to Beatrice, this woman who's kind of haunted the first 2 volumes a little bit and somewhat mysterious. And then she is his guide almost all the way up to the beatific vision. And then it's actually St. Bernard of Clairvaux, if I recall correctly, that actually can show him the beatific vision.
But that's in like a whole other book.
Yeah, so we're getting up into paradise.
That's the whole comedy, which is in 3 books.
Correct.
Inferno, Purgatorio, and then Paradiso.
Right. So one way to look at it is that what Dante does here, if the purpose of the text is to explain virtue and say, okay, why does the soul seek these things, etc., then Dante the Pilgrim really represents humanity. That's what he represents. He represents the human condition. Virgil then will represent human reason, and kind of the best of human reason.
As a pagan.
Yeah, deprived of grace.
Right.
Right.
And you see this played throughout because
Virgil, he's a virtuous pagan.
Right. Because Virgil, like when it comes to like Jesus and things like that, whenever he has not been exposed obviously to the beatific vision, he doesn't know exactly how to explain it throughout the text.
Yeah, if he ever bumps into grace, he usually tries to explain it in like pagan and imperial Roman terms.
Yeah.
Right. When the emperor came, right? Because limbo and Dante's understanding of hell, right? Limbo is the limb, right? It's the edge of hell. And basically it's a paradise, but deprived of the beatific vision. And so it's the same paradise that was Abraham's bosom. So like Adam, Eve, Moses, all these people were there, along with all the virtuous pagans, when Christ came. And then Christ only liberated some of them to go to heaven. And
those who were part of the covenant.
Right, those who...
And maybe others.
And others,
yeah.
Right? Dante's understanding of salvation is fascinating. And so... they get to go up to heaven, and so Virgil's sitting there seeing this thing happen, and he talks about this, great emperor, this great lord that came and liberated them, right?
Where he understands that he is like where the power resides.
Right.
He is like the one who has power.
But he didn't know exactly how to articulate.
Yeah, but I don't know who that guy was, but he is the one who could do anything he wanted.
Right.
One of the interesting things about the Inferno, though, is how Dante structures hell. So when we get back, let's talk about like how he structures it and how it's different from how we would think he would. Does that sound okay?
Sounds great.
Okay. You gave me a look. I wasn't sure.
Oh no, it was great.
Okay. We'll be right back.
Perfect.
We'll be right
perfect. Back. Absolutely perfect.
Absolutely perfect is a high bar, Adam. Congratulations.
Yeah, you're doing a great job.
Behold.
Doing a great job.
Okay. Ready?
I am.
Do Facebook comments appear over here? Top chat.
That's
top
YouTube.
Chat. That's what I meant. Yeah, but they do. It says. Top.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that works.
Oh, live chat. Yeah. Okay.
I'm not sure.
I'm pretty sure they do. Okay.
One takes care of that.
Right.
Welcome back to the Catholic Command Show.
Nope, I haven't recorded yet. Okay, you want me to?
Welcome back to the Catholic Command Show. here with Deacon Harrison Garlick, Chancellor of and in-house counsel of the Diocese of Tulsa and Eastern Oklahoma. Also tutor of the great books of the Alcuin Institute for Catholic Culture.
I love Catholic culture. It's my favorite culture.
Big fan.
That's probably a good thing.
I think it's the best culture of all the cultures.
One of the things that we had talked about before the break was how Dante structures hell. How he, the idea of how he was going to structure hell when I first started was like I thought it'd be the deadly sins.
Right.
Like it seems like that Dante would just that's easy.
That's probably what I would have done.
You just kind of like it kind of writes itself, so to speak. It
or like venial sin into like medium
sins.
Like
There's
like
medium
maybe
sins.
like pass through
medium venial
through smedium,
heavy venial
right
Schmedium.
into the heavy medium.
Yeah. But that's not what he does. In fact, the first circle of hell really shocked me.
Me too.
Well, the vestibule and then the first circle of hell.
Yeah, but the vestibule, that's
yeah. So there's he has the gate of hell, right? Which is kind of a study in of itself because it talks about how primal love moved it into its creation. Then you have the vestibule of hell, which is basically all of the lukewarm people, right? So heaven doesn't want them, hell doesn't really want them, so they go to hell because there's not like a middle ground. But then they're like stuck outside of hell. And so they're milquetoast, kind of lukewarm people.
People who wouldn't pick a side.
Right. And so now they have to march behind a banner for all
God's
eternity.
vomit, so to speak.
Yeah. A banner that's like moving around. They have to chase it.
Then the first circle of hell is limbo, right? And then the second circle.
Wait, limbo is actually the first circle?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the second circle is, I think, the one that shocks people. Right. This is your all's first time to read it. So, like, what did you think?
Well, so if you were to ask me, where does lust belong?
Well, hold on. Before you do that, I think you should talk about your confrontation that you had basically with.
No, I want to save that for the end.
It's the
like
very
that's
beginning.
no. Are you talking about like where I think limbo belongs?
Yeah.
No, because that's just my own thoughts. And let's save that. Save it for the end. Like if you're listening to this on radio, you need to subscribe to the podcast so you can hear my thoughts and my contribution to theology that I made. Because I made a substantial. I basically invented a new eternal destination.
So I agree with skipping that towards the end.
Let's put it at the end.
Okay.
That's where I think.
Okay, so
but so in the very what seems like the first circle, like it's actually the second circle of hell, as Deacon was just saying. But hell proper is the lustful, which right away, just as a modern man, surprised me because I would have thought, oh, lust, that's got to be one of the worst sins.
Okay, but we've got an assumption going on. So why, so we've got the top of hell, right? So the assumption is, because we got to parse that out, right, is that hell's a pit. And so as you go deeper.
Yeah, the structure is that the deeper you go, the more depraved the sin is.
The severity of the sin and the severity of the punishment attached to it. Right. So limbo. Oh, these guys that were virtuous, basically their punishment is deprived of the beatific vision.
Right, but there's no actual there's not like a physical suffering that's going on.
It's basically almost the Greek version of heaven, right? It's the Elysian fields. It's like these fields, there's a castle, et cetera. But yeah, then you get into like, oh, well, what's the second like least severe sin? Lust. Which was just very
weird.
Very weird for me. I don't know. I'm curious to, there's no way we can know. We can only speculate. But if Dante had been alive today, if he would still put lust there, I suppose he might, but maybe not. As someone, I grew up listening to the theology of the body. Okay. Right. My parents would play it in the car when we were kids. So I'm not kidding. I grew up as a child, like 10 years old, listening to Christopher West. Talk about
makes so much sense
about
now.
the theology of the body.
So much sense.
And so like lust, it's this terrible sin.
Right.
So to encounter it right at the beginning, it is a terrible sin, right? Yeah. I mean, it is one of the deadly sins.
Right. So I think so it's just like, well, actually, it's kind of like a discussion on great books. Like, where do you start? If you're an adult, well, you start with these texts. You start reading Plato. If you're a child, well, you start with the fairy tales, right? So all of a sudden, there's a distinction in what is the ordering principle of this thing, right? So the question is, well, then how does Dante actually order hell? So I think that one of the reasons that we think, not to take away from lust, but I think one of the reasons that particularly we're post-Fatima, right? More souls are going to hell because of lust than any other reason.
Yeah.
So, but Dante doesn't structure it by what
It's
sin...
not popularity.
Right, what sin actually causes the most people to go to hell. His general structure, just kind of like to kind of, skip to an overall view, his general structure of hell is which sins are contrary to love.
Mm-hmm.
And in his view, lust is the closest to love, right? And kind of what he means by that is the sins all at the top of the Inferno deal with incontinence. They deal with particularly your inability to moderate pleasure.
Natural desires, because that's the thing, is that your sexual desires are a natural thing.
Right.
You're not perverting necessarily like your appetites. You are perverting your appetites with lust, but it seems like it's actually very close to the way we're made from just on a natural level.
Well, one of the ways that Dante structures hell, because it is interesting when you look at it, you can't fit it into kind of a natural breakdown of sin that like children memorize, right? Like the 7 deadly sins and things like this. So you've got to kind of dig a little deeper into why he orders them. And so what you'll see with the Inferno is that the top sins are all taught by towards the top of the Inferno are all sins of incontinence. So they're dealing with your inability usually to moderate something that is pleasurable. So you're going to get lust, you're going to get greed, you're going to get problems with wealth, whether that's hoarding or spending, these kind of things. And that's distinct then from what he will talk about of sins that have to do with malice, right? So you actually have like malice towards someone else. And then you start getting into things like violence, wrath, suicide, these types of things. And then he gets into malice as obviously expressed through violence, but then malice as expressed through fraud. And this is kind of something that's really interesting for Dante, is that he basically says, listen, malice is worse than sins of incontinence. And then what kind of malice is worse? Well, there's violence, but a beast can also be violent. Like we can be violent, but a beast can also be violent. But beasts typically don't engage in like fraud, right? They don't deceive one another, right? And so the pits of hell end up being, particularly circle 8 and 9, end up being reserved for those who engage in malicious fraud, right? And so there's like 8 is simple fraud. And so we think about, he has even flatterers. I mean, when I first read the Inferno, that was the one that threw me for a loop. So like
flatterers.
It's like, okay, so up here,
because they were like at the bottom
like they're
of their particular like realm.
They're like in circle 8, and like, okay, I'm pretty sure we just had like tyrants like boiling in a river of blood, and
like Genghis Khan was up there much higher,
right? So you rape and pillage half of the known world. Okay, you're not as bad as the guy who flatters someone, right? And so, which is also trying to parse out, what he's doing there, which I think in a lot of ways is getting us to understand the nature of sin and what's actually most depraved for us as humans who have an intellect, who are made in the image of God, who can reason. And so there's certain sins that are reserved for us because we have an intellect. And one of those is betrayal, deceit, fraud. And so those he puts at the very end or very bottom in the pit of hell. And so, he has simple fraud, like people who flatter, people who, he has like pimps down there. He has people who seduce people. He has
grifters.
Yeah, grifters. He has, I can't think of the word right now.
Counterfeiters.
The fortune tellers. Those are the ones.
Fortune tellers,
that's one of the punishments that's the worst, right? So then in the 9th circle, he has complex fraud, which are those who betrayed people they had a special relationship to. People who betrayed their family, people who betrayed friends, people who... and then eventually betrayed their lords, right, their own benefactors. And so there in the very pit of hell, you have Satan, who betrayed God, right? And then in his mouth, he has 3 mouths.
Yeah, traitors is the bottom, you could say it.
Yeah, that's just the traitors is the very bottom, which is frozen, which is another thing that throws people for a loop, right? It's not fire, it's frozen.
Yeah, which there is plenty of... Most of hell is hot and on fire.
Right.
Except for the very bottom.
Yeah, it's cold, which deals with like the nature of evil as a privation of the good, right? It's a lack of something.
Right.
And so, then Satan, his description of Satan is kind of famous. Satan is this gigantic character because he pulls from mythology and scripture. And so the two creatures that fought against their rightful lords, or the giants against the gods, and the angels against our Lord, right, against God. And so he becomes this kind of mashup between the two, right? He's this giant demon, and then he has one head, 3 faces, and then in each mouth he is crushing a soul, right, a person. And so on the 2 sides he has those who betrayed Julius Caesar, so kind of seeing as the top betrayal in the empire, in the political, in the natural, right, to betray the top person, right, the emperor. And then in the middle, the other 2 are facing outward, right, getting munched on, and there's one soul that's facing inward with just their legs sticking out.
Right, and the other 2 on the out, their feet are being chewed on, or their legs. Their head out.
Their head out, yes. Their heads are out, and then there's one in the middle, being eaten in the middle, with his feet
head
dangling
in.
out.
Yeah.
Yes, his head in. And then that's Judas, right, who betrayed our Lord, right? The grace, the supernatural. So I think that when you look at the structure overall, just in a very quick way, he's trying to structure this according to contrary to love. But then he has kind of this scheme that a lot of people aren't completely familiar with, which is that sins of incontinence are not as bad as sins of malice. And then in malice, sins of violence are not as bad as sins of fraud.
Right. Yeah, so you have things like people who murder are higher in hell than people who charge interest to one another.
Yeah. Or fortune tellers.
Which we got sidetracked big time when we were reading this book
Shut
for
up,
a long
Eli.
time.
Shut out, Eli Stone.
All right. I want to talk about contrapassos when we get back.
That sounds great.
So I think we could spend a long time talking about, even if we want to talk about specific contrapassos. Is there anything else that...
Well, I think it's interesting that almost the whole book is basically level 8, the circle 8, and down.
Yeah, like almost half the book.
Yeah, it's about half. Yeah, it's about half the book.
Yeah, it's like as we're reading through it, you're like, wow, we're moving through hell very, very fast.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden it's actually circle 8 has 10 levels in it.
Right.
What's wrong?
No, nothing.
Oh. So I think that's also something that...
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something to note. I think also, like, what's interesting when you read through the Inferno, you can definitely tell when you bump into a sin that Dante the poet hates.
Mm-hmm.
Because he, like, when he talks about simony, right, and he ends and starts that canto with basically just a rant about how this is destroying the church.
I've been thinking. I've thought a lot about simony since then.
Mm-hmm.
You're not thinking about getting into it.
Sounds pretty good. Right.
I mean, like, and I do think
they have one of the best contrapassos in the entire Inferno.
I think that it's just like one of the differences is that back then, when you were borrowing money, it was always.
Are you talking about usury or?
I said simony. Yes, usury.
Okay. Yeah, we're not getting into that because we'd be over 6
Did
hours.
I say simony just now on the? Ah, dang it.
It's okay.
Okay.
Well, that's all right.
I said Dante was from hell earlier.
It's still true that simony comes after the murderers, but thought a lot about usury, and I think back then, if you were going to borrow money, it was always from like a personal, someone that you knew.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I think that makes a big difference because I would feel a moral objection to charging if someone that I know, if I have a friendship with somebody, and I'm going to loan them money. Like, I'm not going to charge you interest, you know? Like, I do find that morally objectionable. Also, if I'm going to loan money to anybody, the answer is either going to be, no, I have no idea who you are. Like,
right.
Hell no, I'm not giving you any money. But if I do know you, then the idea of charging interest is, I do find morally objectionable. But that doesn't mean that I find interest itself morally objectionable, like on a business level.
Yeah,
we're not going to talk. We don't have to talk about it.
I'm just going to throw out this grenade, and then you're not allowed to jump on it.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So let's set aside usury, but I just think I think a dynamic that you bring up that's interesting is the dynamic between, I would not do this because I think it's a sin, but if it's mediated through, like an institution, and it's impersonal, I don't like. I think it's okay. It just reminds me. Patrick Deneen in his book Why Liberalism Failed has a really fascinating conversation that's similar to this about insurance and about why the Amish won't allow their people to buy insurance because it's impersonal. Like you're taking these risks in this pool, and he compares it to them where it's like, no, we're a community together, and if someone in the community's barn like burns down, it's not some impersonal person who's going to come out and help them build it. It's going to be us, right? We're going to do this. So it's really interesting because it wasn't something that I had thought about of just like how much modernity has habituated us that a lot of our economic needs, a lot of our needs in life, etc., get depersonalized through institutions. Where in the past, like these would have been very intimate bonds in the community itself.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think I use the institution because for me, if I'm in a loan, like if I don't know who you are, if I don't know you and you ask me for money, the only way I'd consider it is as an investment. I'm going to take, like, all right, giving you my money. What kind of credit risk am I taking here,
right? By
investing in you.
I think that again, I'm going to sidestep a lot there, but I think that so in great books for the diaconate, we're currently next month going to read John Locke. Right, so the father of liberalism.
Right.
And so...
Are you going to hate every minute of that?
Yeah, he's tremendously wrong on just about everything. Yeah. So it's interesting, right? Because you can read like Marx and Machiavelli, but like again, like several distinctions we've made tonight. It depends on what the ordering principle is when you say like, you know, how you order something, how should you address the great books, how should you structure hell? How is a thing evil? In a certain way, you could say, well, the most removed it is from the good, the more evil it is, so therefore it's the most evil.
Yeah.
But there's another form of evil, right, that we've already kind of alluded to tonight, which is, okay, but what is the evil that actually trips the most people up? Because in a lot of ways, it's actually closer to the good, right? Like brass, as it's said, C.S. Lewis said it, which I think is ironic, that brass is mistaken more for gold than clay is. So which one's actually more dangerous? The brass is, right? Yeah, this is what I think about John Locke. Like he's much more palatable than Hobbes and a lot of the other moderns. And so he seems like a safe harbor. Like, oh yeah, we could totally like build a society based off this. And it's a giant trap.
Seems very familiar.
Right. So my point there though is that I died laughing reading it because of course I'm reading this and I don't agree with anything, and then I started reading the intro for his bio and things like this, and I'm sure it was intentional because then his biographer was like, and John Locke had many friends in his life, and he lended money to them his whole life at interest. It's like, he just had this little thing about like, yeah, he charged all of his friends interest on all the money that he lent them. Right.
See, to me, that means you had no friends. You actually didn't have any friends, you know?
Right. Which might be true in his case.
I'm glad I wasn't. I'm glad I didn't know him. Okay. Are we ready?
Great.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Okay.
Interesting. He decided to get my permission to do something. We're 320 some odd episodes in, and
never
we decide.
Welcome back to the Catholic Man Show. I'm David Niles here with Adam Minahan, Deacon Harrison Garlick. We're talking about the Inferno. So we've kind of laid out the general structure of hell in Dante's Inferno, how he lays it out. And once again, he's not insinuating that hell is actually laid out this way, but I think it is. It's the whole thing is symbolic, right? Of the moral life of allegorical. Well, it could be allegorical, but it doesn't matter. It's just. I think it's intended to cause you to think about sin in general and its consequences, and that I think brings us to a good transition into the Contrappasso. I don't know. It's my assumption that Contrappasso is Latin for against the passion.
It will probably be. He didn't write it in Latin. He wrote it in Italian.
But the word Contrappasso, I mean, it could be an Italian word, but it sounds also Latin. But it doesn't mean against the passion.
Yeah, I think. Well, when you look at how it's used, particularly like in this, right? It's contrary. Like if you look at passions, particularly in a negative, right, of things that can lead us into sin. Then yeah, the Contrappasso is that which is actually contrary to that. And it plays out in different ways. Because it plays out differently in the Purgatory than it does in the Inferno. So in the Inferno, though, what this means is that in every circle, every circle is designated for a particular sin, right? So we talked about earlier. There's limbo, there's lust, there's greed, there's violence, things like this. So then in every single one, the punishment is tailored towards that sin. And this is where I think you see a lot of Dante's genius start to come out. Is okay, then how would you show someone being punished for that sin? And particularly in Inferno, what he's very good about doing is, how do you show that someone has been given over to this sin, right? That this sin has absorbed them and taken them over.
Yeah.
Because you actually get Contrappassos in the Purgatory as well, but they're purging the sin.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big step conversation of like, wait, why are these people punished like this for this sin in hell, but purged for it like this in Purgatory, right? Mm-hmm. But in the Inferno, they're being given over to the sin. So, I think one of the...
Well, they've given themselves over
right.
to the sin.
So probably one of the best examples of this is right off the bat, which is the lustful, right? So the lustful are battered about by great winds, right? You have this storm. I remember the first time I read it, I was just like, okay, there's a storm and they're being punished. Because again, I thought lust, like, oh, this has to be really bad. They're on fire and it's a really hot fire. Something like...
Right.
Something like,
I had a really kind of
like their nether regions will be like on fire, or like something, right? Like it'll be specific,
right? Yeah, I just kind of thought like, I don't know.
I wouldn't have picked being blown about by the winds, but I like it. I mean, I think it works.
So what ends up happening is that you, for lack of a better term, you can kind of reverse engineer these Contrappassos to say, oh wait, Dante's teaching me something. These Contrappassos are catechetical to the soul and its relationship to the sin. So then obviously in the lustful, what they're showing is that throughout their life, the passions move you, right? They affect you, they move you. And so these people gave over to their passions. They were lustful. And so now when they suffer in hell, they're being blown around by the wind. So how they treated their soul is now how they are treated in hell.
Because a passion is something that's like comes from outside of ourselves. Like the word passion, it's not something that we necessarily choose to do. It's an external thing that we choose not to control, right? So we allow ourselves to be blown about by our passions in the same way that these people in hell are being blown about. Instead of striving for self-mastery,
right,
we're resigning ourselves to these external like desires. They're not really external because they're not coming from the world and nature, but it's not something that we're like, oh, I think I'm gonna be lustful today, right?
Correct.
It's something that like, we just kind of happens, and you choose not to control it.
Yeah. So I think one question between the will and the passions is like, where does the movement start?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so like, I don't know why, but it seems like the perennial example is like you're walking down the street and you're choosing to walk down the street, right? That's something your will, like that movement started with you. But then you smell freshly baked bread. You don't have to will yourself to be drawn towards the bread. You don't have to will yourself to salivate. You don't have to will yourself
or to be hungry all of a sudden.
All of a sudden, like,
you weren't hungry before.
Right. So that movement, the interior movement, right, that's triggered right by the senses, starts to move you before you even make a decision to be moved. And right, like as you said, the mastery is like, okay, well then how is my will strong enough then to take command back over the soul, right, under the direction of the intellect, to rein these passions back in. And we're not Stoics, so the passions are good, right? Christ exhibited passions when he was on earth. But then the lustful, going back to Contrappasso, what they've done is the way they treated their soul on earth is now how they're treated in hell. They're blown around, just like they allowed their soul to be blown around. What are some other ones? Because you guys read the book for the first time, so what are some other ones that stood out to you?
Obviously the schismatics.
Right.
I also like the fortune tellers.
Right. Well, tell us about the schismatics.
So the schismatics are all in this big circle. They're kind of walking around in a big circle, and as there's a demon, and as they come to the demon, he has a sword, right, or something, and he like basically just cuts him open. And they each have their own way that they're cut open according to the way that they caused schism on earth. That's where Muhammad, right? He's
correct.
Yeah, so he's here, and basically Muhammad is cut open. The whole book is graphic. Okay, like we talked about several times, they will never make a movie.
At least not an honest one.
Right. So Muhammad is cut open like from the neck, like basically all the way down the middle, like past his legs, kind of, where his guts spill out every time. And as they continue to walk, they're reintegrated, and so that by the time they get back to where the demon is again, they're all put back together and they can be cut open afresh. So
So like, what does that teach us about schismatics?
That they are cutting open, dividing the body of Christ.
Right.
So who's the guy whose head gets cut off?
I know. I was just thinking about that.
Who is that?
That's the line, right? That the Contrappasso is actually used explicitly, right? He holds up his own head and says, "Behold in me the perfect Contrappasso."
Right.
Right. Yeah, I'd have to go back and actually remember who it was, but that's where it actually uses Contrappasso.
That's where the word comes from. Is I am the.
It's one of the few times he actually uses it explicitly.
The word Contrappasso,
yeah,
right?
He says it explicitly there.
So, and the idea is that he's having his head cut off. Was he? He was. Was it? It wasn't area. No,
he's just some schismatic.
But
right?
he was a proponent of something that was like really dividing the church at the time.
Correct.
And so he's having his head cut off as if like he's separating. Christ is the head in the body of Christ. He's separating Christ from the rest of the church. That's why schism is such a bad idea. It's so terrible. And in fact, heresy is way higher in the Inferno than schism, because the schismatics, they don't actually necessarily believe in a like. You could at least give Arian a break that. You could give him you could at least say, well, maybe he honestly like believed the things that he was, this Arian heresy, right? And, he's just really trying to do what's right, okay? If you're just going to go really, really far and give him the benefit of the doubt. But the schismatics, that's not really necessarily the case. Often it's more for political gain or more self-interested than that.
Well, it's interesting that Dante then, right, if you look at where they are in hell, he merges them with malice. Right. There's this violent nature to them. Yeah, they have a great Contrappasso. I think some other ones. You mentioned the fortune tellers. It's interesting because I would say that Dante's Inferno as a whole is not a graphic text, right? I don't think he actually goes into a lot of detail, but as we kind of mentioned earlier,
but there are a few times
you can tell when Dante does not like a sin. Dante, the poet, right? He's like, I do not like this sin, and he will all of a sudden become incredibly vulgar. Right. Describing like, here's this person, and I cannot describe to you how vulgar like they are right now. So,
or he's just like very intricate. You can tell you took your time, like
correct.
Simony,
right?
The priest being pocketed.
Yeah. So explain that one, because that's a beautiful one actually.
So Simony is like selling either things that are holy, or he kind of really refers to it as selling church office.
Right.
To me, I more like today. I think. We tend to think of Simony as more selling a relic, selling of a relic. But he's saying, okay, these are bishops or popes who are taking money in order to like, oh, you want to be a cardinal? All right, give me $1,000 and I'll make you a cardinal. And so they're pocketing money in order to, dole out these gifts. And so in hell, they're being pocketed. They're going like head first into this like hole.
Yeah.
And while if they're the most recent addition, head first into the hole, their feet are being burned, right?
They're still sticking.
Their feet are sticking out, and they're like being burned in flames until the next person comes and pushes them a little bit further down. Right. Their feet aren't being burned anymore, but now they're like totally trapped in this hole as they continue to get pushed further and further in as more souls come. And they seem to know. It was kind of interesting to see how. Souls in hell, according to Dante, know that
when the next one's coming.
What their knowledge is.
Yeah, they know the future to a certain degree.
To a certain degree, right.
And then
but they don't know the current state of events.
Correct. They can only see the future. Yeah, so I think that's one of the best ones. The fortune tellers, right? That's another one where he kind of spends his time describing them, right? They're marching around in a circle, and their heads are twisted all the way back around, right? They thought they could see into the future, so their heads are twisted all. And he talks about them weeping and their tears going down their back and over their butt. Right, and spends like great detail in explaining this kind of like horrific scene. Yeah, I mean, there's like so many good ones. Even like even ice at the bottom, right, showing like this almost complete depravity of the warmth of God's love, right at the end, and also then just evil as a privation, a lack of something, right? Like cold is a lack of warmth. Yeah, I mean the Contrappassos I think are really, when I tell people to read the first time. The Contrappasso is where I tell people to focus, because that's where you're really getting this dialogue of like, okay, what is the sin? How are they punished for it? And what is it that I can learn from how this sin is actually punished?
Yeah.
If you're listening on the radio right now, check out thecatholicmanshow.com. We'll continue this conversation with Deacon Harrison Garlick, Chancellor and in-house counsel of the Diocese of Tulsa, Eastern Oklahoma. Deacon, it's great to have you on as always.
Thanks, guys.
And we'll continue this conversation on the podcast. We're on the Lord's team.
The winning side.
So raise your glass. One of the interesting things I thought that happened throughout the Inferno was how Dante reacted to the people in hell.
Right.
So he's going through and sometimes he's talking to people in hell. Sometimes Virgil says like, nope, we're not talking to these people. This isn't good for you. We're going to move forward. We're going to just move on. But how he talks to people in hell at the very beginning, he has like all this pity for them. Oh man. I can't believe poor so-and-so, I can't believe he's dealing with this right now. And then as it goes on and he gets deeper and deeper in hell, and I think there's a maturity that happens to Dante the poet, he starts realizing the justice that is happening in hell and not necessarily taking pity upon the people in hell.
Yeah, he somewhat famously at the end of, because he goes through the vestibule, I think he's already passed out at least once by that point. And then he goes through limbo, and then when he gets to the lustful, it's like, he dialogues with Francesca, right? And he's totally seduced by her.
Right, he is like
totally. So Francesca and Paolo, there's these lovers, and they fell into lust, and now they're kind of intertwined in this hellish embrace, being passed around and battered by the winds in hell. And she tells her story to him, and he falls for it. I mean, he has pity for it. That the operative word usually throughout the text, particularly Moose's translation, is pity, right? When is he having pity? And it's interesting because there's an ordered pity and a disordered pity. And so with the ordered pity, because the whole comedy starts with pity, right? The Blessed Virgin Mary has pity on Dante. There he is, like an idiot, lost in the woods. He doesn't know where to go. He's scared. He's fallen from grace. And she has pity on him. It's an ordered pity to help him. And then he goes into hell, and he starts having pity on the souls that are there. And I think this is a very challenging thing as moderns, because we read this, we're like, oh, that's a horrific situation. And we pity them, right? We feel sorry for them. And we think, oh my gosh, how could they suffer this terrible fate? And I think what Dante the poet plays out throughout the kind of maturation of Dante the Pilgrim throughout the Inferno is that we have to align our understanding of justice with the divine wisdom. And what Dante the Pilgrim doesn't understand at the beginning is that when he comes into hell and he's seduced by someone, and there's this pity, and he falls for that, and he even swoons and passes out again, when he pities them, what you're saying is, you shouldn't be here, or this shouldn't be happening to you. Right. I would alleviate you from this.
Right.
And what he doesn't realize at the beginning of the Inferno is that's placing him contrary to divine wisdom. Divine wisdom has placed the souls in hell. They have merited that damnation. They're in the circle that Providence ultimately through King Minos has placed them. And to say, I would alleviate you from this is actually a sin. You're placing yourself contrary to divine wisdom. And it's completely contrary to us as moderns.
Right, because
totally.
That's what you hear a lot of times.
Well,
how can I be happy in heaven if I know that my family member or something like that is in hell?
And we think the ultimate evil in the modern world is suffering. For the modern man, nothing is worse than suffering.
Right.
I mean, because we don't ever do that. I mean, that's so foreign to us, at least in the first world, at least here in America and in other first worlds. We go from our climate-controlled house in our, memory foam, fantastic beds, into our climate-controlled car, into our climate-controlled office, where everything is like we're comfortable all the time, right?
Yeah.
If we're hungry for like 10 minutes, we got to do something about that. Okay?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't even like to be still. Like when I'm in the elevator, I pull out my phone, okay, just to comfort myself. I'm not actually going to do anything on my phone.
Right.
I actually don't do that. I have a rule against cell phones in the elevator for several reasons. But anyway, it's just like suffering that's the thing to avoid, right? And when other people suffer, we need to we need to help them. Can we like throw money at them or something? You know, like
Yeah, and I would take that a step further to say I think probably one of the greatest atrocities, according to the moderns, is for someone to suffer because they can't have the self-creation of their will, right? They can't be who they desire themselves to be, right? As a modern person. So this is like if you look at like our culture and how we treat ethics now and morality, basically everything's based off consent. And if this person wants to do this thing, like who are you to come in and say they can't do that? It's completely relativistic. We're atomized, autonomous moral universes that kind of engage in this kind of self-creation.
The Supreme Court said I have the right to define reality for myself.
Yeah, Justice Kennedy's famous comment is he says it at the heart of liberty. I recently stated that it's actually at the heart of what's wrong with America. Right.
Right, that I have the right to define reality.
Yeah. And I think what's worse than that is that then I have the right to others to have to confirm me in that pseudo-reality, right? And this is a lot of the problems that we're dealing with right now. There's no objective order. So I think that one of the things that's jarring for Dante, and I've read it with people in another group who would never get over this fact, who actually would argue that Dante's maturation throughout the Inferno is a negative. Because by the end, he's now granted, you have to be careful in the Inferno because it's the first of 3 books, and so his spiritual journey has to continue. So like at the end, the pendulum swings a little bit too far, and he's like kicking the souls and increasing their punishments. In a certain way, you could argue like, well, that's good because that's what they deserve. But I think he himself needs to kind of undergo a little bit more of a spiritual maturation.
Yeah, because adding to the punishment, that is prideful, because now you're saying, oh, God didn't give you enough. I mean, now you're kind of doing the same thing.
Like, it's like, is he being used as an instrument of God's wrath there, or is he displaying his own in a disordered way? And so I think you have to take Dante like he's really in the first steps of his journey, even though he does mature, I think, in the Inferno.
I mean, the punishments in hell are eternal, right? And so like,
and get worse.
Yes, once the incarnation happens, it's going to be.
Yeah, once we have the bodily resurrection, right, at the end of time, then everyone's actually embodied, and they go back into hell, right? Because you guys had the section on hell, so we have a private judgment right when we die. We go to heaven or hell or purgatory, and then but
purgatory is temporary.
Correct, and everyone that goes to purgatory is going to go to heaven,
right?
Which is fascinating when you read the purgatory about who Dante puts there, right? Which is kind of a fascinating conversation. And so, then all of a sudden, all those, we have this like judgment of the nations and the sheep and the goats and these things, Matthew 25. And then everyone goes back to where they were, assuming they were dead prior. And then all these people that were suffering in hell suffer more because now they're suffering embodied as opposed to simply souls, because we're composite creatures.
Right. And like they were frozen, their souls are frozen. But when they have their bodies, now they're going to feel that more. In fact, he talks about that. He mentions it in the Inferno. Something about will be more perfected,
right?
Or
everything's perfected. So if you go to heaven in a certain way, even though Aquinas is really nuanced on this, then you will enjoy that more, right? Because it's not mediated through the senses, the beatific vision, but the body, since it's joined to the soul, right? There's a certain delight there.
Yeah, the senses will be a part of the ultimate happiness in heaven.
Overall, yeah. And same thing with the punishments in hell. Everyone gets their body back, except for who? One circle does not get their bodies back.
Oh, yeah. I don't remember who that is.
Those who misuse their bodies.
Yes. Okay, yeah, because they turn into trees. Well, they do get their body back, but they don't get to be, embodied.
Right. So the suicides. Violence against self.
That's also a great Contrappasso, I thought.
It is. It's probably one of the clearest Contrappasso. So they misuse their body and life. And so obviously Dante's not having a pastoral approach to these things. And so if you do read it with a group, sometimes it can be jarring for people. And so obviously then they misuse their bodies and life. They're then deprived of even the bodily form, the human form in hell. They turn into these trees that are super sensitive. And when they're broken, they bleed and cry and do these things. And then, at the end of time...
In fact, the only way they can speak is when you break a branch. Right. Then, they can, kind of speak out the whole...
And he has a wonderful thing that the blood that comes bubbling out of the branches is like when you try and use a log that still has sap in it in the fireplace.
Yes.
Right, and it just comes bubbling out.
And he can hear it hissing.
Right.
Yeah. it was incredible. But at the resurrection, they'll get their skin will be hung from their branches or something. So they will get their bodies back, but it will just be hung on the branches of their tree, the tree that they are.
Which theoretically is going to be a source of pain for them.
Right.
Yeah, so their own body becomes part of their own contrappasso.
Mm-hmm. Just in the beginning when we first started reading it, several people would be like, well, maybe he's suggesting this, like all this like really deep meaning. And I was a little skeptical, certainly in the beginning, thinking, really, guys, I think that you're giving him a lot of credit here,
right?
As if like he was actually intended all of these super deep levels of meaning. I mean, just amazingly deep, because the cantos, the chapters, if you want to call them, very short.
Yeah.
They're like a couple pages.
Right.
And then as we went on, I realized, no, I was wrong. He is writing with that level of depth. It was absolutely incredible.
He's a master. He's an absolute master.
I mean, there's a reason why this is one of the great books. I mean, I don't know how many years he spent pondering this before he wrote it. It's clear that Dante was a absolute genius.
Right.
That his level of thinking, his understanding of things, the way he saw the world, was just on a much wider scope than how I see the world. And that's just one thing I wanted to make sure to say before we walked away, before I started giving my own theology.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. We should come up with something else to talk about.
That's a great idea.
I think that. I would push that maybe even a bit further. That he's probably not one of the great books. He's probably one of the greatest books. What I mean by that is he's writing right after Thomas Aquinas. It's prior. He writes prior to Thomas Aquinas being canonized. So his reliance on Thomas Aquinas throughout the structure,
certainly before he's popularized.
In a lot of ways, yeah. I mean, the Archbishop of Paris is trying to get him condemned, and a lot of things. So Dante takes some leaps here, which I think actually really play out for him. And then when you get to Paradise,
takes some leaps that don't play out for him.
Well, maybe, and maybe it just depends on how you look at it.
Saints in hell.
He does put a couple saints in hell.
Celestin. Well.
So hold on.
He doesn't say his name.
We got to make it through like one idea. So
you're right.
My point here is
we'll go back. We'll circle back.
Right. My point here is that he's writing in the age of the Summas, right? That all this knowledge has come together, and I don't think Dante's comedy is like the Summa of St. Thomas Aquinas in poetry. That's what it is. I mean, that's really what it is. And I don't think anything comes close to try and take all those thousands of years of knowledge and virtue in the soul and bring them together and weave them kind of harmoniously as he does, right? In this great harmony. I just don't think anything comes close.
Yeah, and especially when you think about the fact that in Italian, the whole thing rhymes. I mean, it's amazing when we read it in English, depending on the translation, it's going to rhyme more or less, but mostly less. It doesn't rhyme in English. And it's just so incredibly deep and rich. Just the things that he's able to say in so short in like so few words.
Tercets. Yeah.
Right. And then you think about the fact that when he wrote this, it was all in verse, and the whole thing is in rhyme. It just adds this whole extra mind blow to the, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if mind blow is a...
We're just going to run with it.
But when you read it, your mind is blown so much that, like, you just say mind blow.
Right.
You can't think of better words
to
say.
That happens a lot in a small group. Someone's eyes just get really wide.
Just
and
imagine
they just
our
go,
small group.
You just go like, mind blow.
The insights we have are just tremendous.
Can I just tell you, insights? Mind blow?
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, and honestly, and when we talked about earlier about like the great books, and as an adult, where do you start with children? I expressed to you guys earlier off air that one of my goals is to educate my children to when the time they become adolescents, and I think they're capable of reading the comedy and that it would be a good for them, that they have the tools to actually read it. That they're not sitting there going like, oh, wait, who is this in mythology, or who's this, or what does he mean by this scripture? Because some of his scripture references are really subtle too, right? Who's this? What's he doing? Like, I want them to be able flow through it, not necessarily as like a master of everything, but like it's a familiar land to them, right? They know these things, and they can start to immediately go into the deeper levels. Whereas opposed to like the first time I read it, I read it by myself. Moose's notes were incredibly helpful, but I had to like reread it several times before I felt like I actually started to grasp what he was doing, just because so much of it was foreign.
Can I send my kids to your house?
No. But we can have.
Thank you for asking.
We can start a little. We'll start a child's great books circle, and we'll read and discuss these things. So, well, you guys do have Greek mythology assets right now.
Yes.
To do that.
Yes. Thank you so much for that book.
So,
thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good book. Greek mythology by Dulliers, I believe.
Because one thing about Dante's Inferno is that he blends Greek mythology and like the saints and church history and Roman history together in a way that was so seamless. I had never seen it done before. For instance, when you get to the circle of hell for those who are using the Lord's name in vain, you have a pagan who blasphemes one of the Greek gods.
Yeah, Zeus, Jupiter.
Right. Greek gods, Roman gods, it's kind of the same thing. But and it's just fascinating that
that's his example of
that's
blasphemy.
the example, because surely there's 1,000 fantastic examples of someone blaspheming the actual God.
Right.
And yet he chooses this person from Greek mythology who's blaspheming one of the Greek gods for the Contrappasso, where he's laying down on the burning sand.
Right.
But still like prideful and...
Yeah, one thing is that we talk about...
It was just crazy.
Yeah, one thing we talk about the diaconate, when we kind of... Because I think that a lot of men are jarred when they see how he uses the Greek mythology, and like, is this not just intertwining Catholicism with paganism? Like, oh my gosh, don't show your Protestant friends this book. Like, this is what they're worried about.
Right.
I think that what we need to realize is that, and a lot of people were like, Wayne, if you read St. Augustine, he's like, all the pagan gods are demons. Don't have anything to do with them. Like, thank you very much. But then when we see kind of past the millennial point, right, is no one's believing in these gods anymore. And they almost get baptized into these stories of virtue that can be used to express things.
Right.
And then, because particularly you're getting Aristotle coming back and things like this, they kind of get used as, hey, you know what? Even the pagans could figure this out, right? So what happens? You go to blasphemy, and you're like, oh, right, well, here's going to be an example of someone who blasphemed against Jesus, and the example is a pagan who blasphemed against Zeus. And you can say, like, well, that's weird, but what you're realizing is, like, wait, if that guy gets punished because he blasphemed against what he should have known at least was a higher power by the natural reason of natural virtue of religion, how much greater is someone going to be punished who blasphemes against Jesus Christ?
Right.
What you realize is that the higher that you raise the pagans in nature, and this is what happened with the church with Aristotle. All of a sudden, here's Aristotle who can figure out all these things about virtue and the soul and etc. by reason alone. If he can do that by reason alone, where should we go when we're perfected by grace?
Okay, what if you blaspheme the being whose essay and essence are the same, right? Like Zeus, he doesn't have that, okay? Right. Like Zeus had a beginning.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, Zeus isn't even a good god, right? But the point there is that what we forget, particularly as moderns, again, is that there is a natural virtue of religion. You, by nature alone, should know that there is a higher power above you, and to blaspheme that out of your own pride, because that's what he does, right?
Right.
I think it's actually in the Sophocles plays, right? That he's coming over the wall and he doesn't need Jupiter anymore, right? He doesn't need Zeus, and he's struck dead.
Also Jove. That's the one thing I learned, that when we say by Jove,
right,
that we're actually swearing by Zeus, by Jupiter.
By Jupiter, yeah.
And I did not know that.
Right. Is that a phrase that you...
It makes me feel a little bit more guilty for saying
Is that a phrase that you use?
I don't use it very often, but I have said it.
It's like really kind of like 1800s.
The thing is, I just didn't realize. I didn't realize.
Jove.
I was swearing by a Greek god.
Yeah, and then my monocle falls off, and then
exactly.
I don't know. Yeah, we don't hear that one in the chancery very often.
Like, Dave, so let me ask you this: what was what was the one thing that struck you when reading Dante for the first time that you were like, really took you back?
That made me think the most?
No, that was like, that doesn't seem right.
Usury can't be an answer.
Okay. Yeah, aside from usury. Well, so you kind of mentioned it. Dante's progression from at first pitying the sins in hell to learning not to pity the sins in hell, and I think that's rightly. But there's one instance where it's not that he's not pitying the sins in hell, but he's reveling. It seems like, at least, reveling over like over their suffering. Like he's not just saying, "Oh, praise God," praise God who made all things, and praise Him for His divine justice. He's saying like, I want to see it. Like I want to just. Cause there's a person who had slighted him in
curiosity, right? It's like he wants to see it.
There's a person who had slighted him in life, who he hates, and it seems like he wants to see him suffering because of his own hatred for this person, which that is disordered. We should say praise God for the sufferings of the souls in hell, not because of our hatred for them, but because of our love for God. Right? But it seems like in the book, and it reads as if he's relishing in their suffering, which to me is a little disordered. But then Virgil praises Dante the Pilgrim for enjoying the like watching. I mean, to me, it just seemed a little depraved.
Yeah, I think there's multiple things going on there. I think, because I agree, it's a little jarring. You're like, wait, is this virtuous? Like, why are we doing this? So I think there's a few things. One, recall that Dante's early in his own formation, right?
Right.
So we need to be careful about thinking about where that everything he does.
It is towards the beginning of, like, not at the very beginning of the book, but kind of right after he has learned his lesson about pitying the souls in hell.
Right.
And I think, anyway, keep going.
Yeah. So we have to be careful because he's in the middle of his formation, et cetera. I don't think at times he's supposed to be an exemplar. I think there is, a true maturity that's starting to happen, right? I mean, you could argue that having pity for these souls is a greater mistake than having a disordering understanding of the punishment that they're receiving, right?
Right.
So you have a disordered delight in it. Actually, you are, again, things that jar us as moderns, I think you are actually supposed to delight in it by the praise of God, right? And that's what Aquinas will talk about, and that's why the punishment of the damned can't be an impediment to your enjoyment of heaven, right? Because the reception of justice is a good and a praiseworthy good, but one that is difficult for our imaginations to grasp. So I think that he's moving from a lesser or a greater mistake to a lesser mistake. I don't think he's perfect yet. When he goes through purgatory, it's really interesting because his maturity and spiritual maturation is much more explicit because he's actually marked with the 7 sins that he then has to purge.
Himself?
Yes, himself. He's marked with...
I'm reading Purgatorio right now.
Oh, you are?
Yeah.
You are?
Congrats.
I didn't know this.
Yeah, congrats. Yeah, so I don't know if you got to...
Slowly, but I am.
Yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful book. And I actually think that it is even... The Inferno makes you think about the relationship between sin. I think that the Purgatory, because as you get there, every terrace has so many examples for each. So even like when you get to the first terrace, it's like everyone starts off with an example from Mary that can purge that sin. Like, here's a contrary example to this sin. And then here's something from the pagan world, from the natural world, that even you could use to do this. And then when they're going up, like, the first sin that has to be purged, pride. Like, Purgatory is much more systematic than, like, in the Inferno, you're like, wait, why are we here now? And, like, why is this going on?
Yeah.
So, like, on Purgatory, the first terrace, they have a giant boulder on their back. It represents their pride. So they have to do what? Bend down. Carved into the ground are, I think, 13 examples of pride from Scripture and from mythology that they're looking at as they're meditating. So again, this giant corpus of references about, pride. And then as they start to be able to lift their backs and their heads, they can look at the wall, right? The exterior of the mountain, and it's carved with examples of humility, right? And they can slowly lift up. And then when they get to the end, they're always singing a song. There's a song that they're always singing that helps purge that sin. Then the angel declares a beatitude, and then there's the angel at every single one. And then he does this all the way up. So this, like, for someone who gives homilies, it's an amazing resource of like, oh, okay, here's the sin that's referenced in Scripture. What's related to it? And there's this whole blossoming of things that come out of it.
Interesting.
So,
That's because I imagine, having not finished the book, that purgatory would be a lot more relevant for us here in life than Inferno, because in the Inferno there's no hope, right? But in life we can still purge ourselves, and we should be seeking actually like those. That's the kind of action we should be seeking after, not just a contrappasso of like pure justice and suffering, but we should actually be seeking to do things that purge ourselves of the things we suffer with.
I made the mistake one time of telling my professor that I greatly enjoyed the Inferno. I kind of enjoyed Purgatory, and I really actually did not like Paradise. I found it quite boring. And he told me that we enjoy that which with we're more familiar.
Right.
And I was like, oh, okay.
Thank you. I hope you still please give me an A.
I will ask you no more questions.
Can I still please have an A?
But I actually do think most people just read the Inferno, and they can't. And actually, Purgatory and particularly Paradise are just not. They're so foreign, right? So I do think that, a lot of people focus a lot on the Inferno. I think Purgatory only makes sense if you're actively trying to purge your soul, right? Mm-hmm. If you actually are trying to live a life of, configuring yourself to the cross of Christ, this Purgatory makes sense. Because if not, you're like, well, this is kind of a rehash of the Inferno, and now they're just doing different things, and I don't understand. And you miss Dante's brilliance of saying, no, look, this is a contrappasso when you're being handed over to the sin. This is the contrappasso when you are being purged of it. And those two things are different. Mm-hmm. And also the souls in Purgatory delight in it.
Right.
Mm-hmm. They want it, right? Yeah. This kind of goes back to that kind of axiomatic thing of, the fires of hell and Purgatory are the same. It's just, the ones in hell fight against it and the ones in Purgatory embrace it, right?
Right. So should we get into my contribution to
I would love to hear it.
To theology.
I have enough alcohol, so yeah, go for it.
Can we just top him off a little bit?
I'm good. I'm good.
He should be good.
Okay, so
next time.
One of my
I was just saying that because he hasn't touched it.
Right.
It's
one of my big hang-ups
I took some sips.
Yes.
Was that limbo was in the what do they call it of hell?
Well, no, limbo.
The first level.
Limbo is the first level of hell.
Yeah,
it's
okay.
the first proper level.
Okay, right.
You're
right.
It's the limb.
You're right. So, like, I had a problem with that.
Right.
And I think part of that problem stems from conflating the limbo of the fathers with, like, what we might call a modern day limbo, which essentially would be reserved only for unbaptized infants or like or people who die before they're born. Because if you've reached the age of reason, limbo seems like it's no longer an option for you. Right? Like if you're capable of committing mortal sin, you've reached that point in your development where you can say, no, I actually choose to reject God, which an infant cannot do. Mm-hmm. Even like a 2-year-old really can't do because I don't think they really understand what it is that they're doing and rejecting. They're, just subject to their passions in a way that an adult is not, right?
Hopefully.
I mean, I even think I believe that's what the church's stance on 2-year-olds is. That
I guess it's pretty hard on 2-year-olds, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like that's 2-year-olds are pretty hard on us, so maybe I get it. But so I think that's kind of part of my hang up.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that the little that I know of limbo is that it's described as a place of natural happiness. And, like for me, definitions are foundational in understanding what a thing is.
Yeah, grammar.
So because it's described as a place of natural happiness, the fact that happiness is like one of the 2 words, one of the 3 words, place, I'm not counting, of, natural happiness, that it just doesn't seem like that realm should belong to hell, which is happiness and hell to me, do not mix. It's like oil and water. They don't belong together.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems to me like limbo should be the vestibule of heaven, not the vestibule. And I know Dante doesn't put it in the vestibule, but it doesn't seem to me like limbo is hell per se.
Right.
Even though he puts it there. And I understand, because we've talked about this, Deacon, that in your response, and rightly so, is that, well, do the souls in hell enjoy the beatific vision? Which is kind of the definition of heaven.
Right.
Not kind of. That is the definition of heaven.
Mm-hmm. And
no, they don't. So I see why Dante doesn't ascribe them to heaven. That makes sense. And so as I was thinking about this, the limbo of the fathers, you could be an old man, have lived a long life, and end up there. Everybody did for a long time, until Jesus rose from the dead, descended into until he rose, descended into the dead, right, and took people. I know I didn't get that in the right chronological order. He died, descended into hell, then rose, right? I get it. But
oh man.
But so there's the limbo of the fathers, and I don't know. Does the church say that the limbo of the fathers and that this more modern idea of limbo for unbaptized infants are the same?
Well, yeah. So okay, let's just see if we can parse things out.
I don't want to get anything wrong off the bat.
Yeah. So just for those who aren't familiar, right? So there's when it's funny because right off the bat, right? Everyone in the Old Testament goes to hell. Everyone born before Jesus goes to hell.
They go to the place of the dead.
Everyone goes to hell. They go to hell. And so, right, because they're deprived of the beatific vision. And so what happens here? Well, okay, so this is called limbo of the fathers, right? Because Moses is there, Adam's there, etc. You get Abraham's bosom. This is the same place, right?
But I don't think we can per se call it hell, because at Jesus' transfiguration...
Okay, let me parse it out. Okay.
You have Moses appearing,
right.
Glorified almost. I mean, he appears to the apostles in what they perceive as a glorified state. He's not like a regular dude.
Right.
He's at least a little bit glorified. Is he like heaven glorified?
No.
No. But they think he's glorified.
So, are you there?
They think he's glorified.
Okay. So, okay. Let's just going to move through kind of what the church teaches, right?
Welcome to the Catholic Mansion.
Very good. Very good.
I love you guys. So, so there is this Abraham's bosom. And when we say that, what do we mean? Because I think this is where you really have to parse this out insofar as okay, well, Christ talked about this, right? Because we miss this, and I talk about this in RCIA. It's okay, here is the poor man, Lazarus, he dies. We have the rich man, etc. And then they describe that they see each other after they've died.
Yeah.
And they see each other over like a canyon.
And one of them is in hell, and the other one is in Abraham's bosom.
Right. Well, hell, insofar as we understand it, as a place of torment.
Right.
So,
but they're not in the same. It's very clear that they're not in the same place.
No, I think they are in the same place.
No, because there is
they can see each other. They can hear each other. They're just surrounded by a chasm. I mean,
but there's a great chasm between them. They can't go. It's even impossible for one to go to the other place.
Okay, but those are different distinctions. Whether or not you can actually go to that place doesn't mean you're actually in a separate place, right? I mean, it's all one big. I mean, they can see each other. They can talk to each other. They can.
They're not in the same place because he said, "I can't even get to you."
Yeah, I don't want to equivocate here. So just because if we're in a room and I can't get to the other side of the room, that doesn't mean that we're not in the same building. They're in the same place.
Yeah, right. But
just because I can't move to that location doesn't actually mean that specific location doesn't mean that we're not actually sharing.
To me, the
same atmosphere.
The fact that there's that kind of distinction, a chasm. It's clearly a distinct to me.
Well, they're very distinct.
There's a distinction here that okay, if you were over here with us,
right,
I could get to you, but you're not here with us. There's a distinction here that's being made. I don't mean to say that
you hold on to the chasm, and we'll see where we go with it. Okay, you hold on to the chasm.
Very good.
So, in the story, right, they can see each other, they can hear each other, etc. One is suffering torment, and the other one is at peace. Right, he's literally laying on Abraham's chest. Right. In many ways, this is also Sheol, right?
The place of the dead.
And so this is like what the medievals will call the limbo of the fathers, because then all the fathers went down, etc. And this is what is most properly understood as, and this is why I feel very comfortable calling it this is what we mean in the creed when we say Christ descended into hell, right? And so Christ descends into hell. Well, what does he mean? Well, you get some really terrible
It's really the
theologies. Dead. It's he's going into the limbo of the fathers, right? And he's going, because then our first pope in his epistle talks to us that he went down there and preached the gospel to the dead. So I think like using the term like this is hell, he went to hell, he preached to the gospels in hell is very apostolic and scriptural, right? The question then is that then he very clearly takes people out of that limbo, right?
But to make a distinction, he wasn't going to Judas, he wasn't going to
Yeah, the souls that he preached to are the ones that are in that limbo.
We're not talking about hell proper. We're not talking about the place of the damned. We're talking about the limbo of the fathers.
Maybe. I think when you talk about hell proper,
I think modernly, when we say hell,
right,
we don't mean like Sheol. We don't mean like the place of the dead. I think in a modern, like our modern mind, when we say hell, we mean the people who are damned in hell for all eternity.
Right. But God help us if we predicate our ideas based off what we think of as modern.
Well, but it just so that the thing is, Deacon, the only people who listen to this podcast are modern people.
Well, that's why we have these things, right? So my point here is that the creed, okay, you can hold on to your distinctions. The creed says Christ descended into hell, right? It is a place in hell because there's no other place. I mean, where are they going to go? It's not purgatory because they don't have grace. You have to have grace to go to purgatory.
Well, there was no purgatory yet.
And you can't go to heaven prior because you have no sanctifying grace. So you go to hell. There's not like, other options.
Do you think when he like liberated people from Abraham's bosom, did he just take a lot of them to purgatory? I mean, or do you think that like those souls enjoyed a special purification?
That's a great question. So we're going to table it so we can finish the question.
Because we don't know.
Well, let's finish the questions that we asked, right?
Right. I know. I get more questions than I do answers.
What is like? So what happens? So I think the question, because I think limbo in certain ways deserves a defense in a lot of ways because most of the church has believed this. Well, so you get the limbo of the fathers, and so it's very clear that Christ goes there, he preaches to the damned, and then he takes the damned up with him into his Father's house, right? He preaches the gospel. So the question then is, does that place endure as a place in hell that can still receive souls post-Christ? So that's the question.
Yes.
Okay, that is the question. So then, and then obviously like the kind of perennial example of this is, what do you do with unbaptized children? Right, which again, as moderns, we don't like to discuss.
Right. Because, just to clarify, it seems like it's possible that Abraham's bosom almost transforms into purgatory.
No.
I mean, but like the people who were going there before, they're not damned. They were in a place of waiting. A place of like what you could almost call purification.
Right, but they don't undergo it there. But you are correct insofar as one of the big distinctions is that those who went there prior to Christ would still have hope.
They had the hope of right,
which I think changes that dynamic of what is the nature of this place, right? Because if they still have hope of the beatific vision, or really of salvation, and depending on how they can view that, but regardless, hope endures, right? That's going to be a different eternal mindset.
I think that's what I mean.
That those go in. So then, I mean, but what ends up happening is the question is, does this place endure as a place that God can send souls to in hell as a place of mercy, right? So basically you are a virtuous so-and-so, virtuous pagan, even according to Dante, virtuous Muslims, right? Is this a place that God can send you, and basically you lived a virtuous life according to whatever, but then you weren't baptized, right? You didn't actually have sanctifying grace, and so you go there, according then also with all the infants. I think what's interesting in church history is we have to realize that this is somewhat of, I don't want to say a compromise, but like this is not St. Augustine's position.
Sure.
St. Augustine's is you go straight to hell. Everyone straight to proper, tormented grief,
hell proper,
right? And so
lake of fire.
Right. So this doesn't really sit well. And so the church, this understanding then, I think that limbo. So yes, because of the economy of salvation, we can't say, it seems odd to say, that those who are unbaptized receive the beatific vision. Because according to the economy of salvation and the sacraments that we have to work with, that's not what we were told, right? To be saved, you have to be baptized. So the medievals, right, would say, okay, but God's mercy endures, and so then those people can go to limbo because we know it's a place, right, in hell, and so they can go there. This seems to be very clear with Aquinas and others about unbaptized infants, right? How is God merciful to them while also adhering to the economy of salvation? Okay, well, they can go to this place. Dante takes it a step further into this place that then can not only maintain pagan souls pre-Christ, like Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, but then can receive souls post-Christ as adults who lived a virtuous life but were still damned, right? So like Saladin, right, the Muslim general who was known for his virtue, goes to limbo. You know, a lot of Romans, right, go there. And so he has these people post-Christ that are going to limbo, which is really kind of an interesting thing from his own soteriology. And from the medieval mindset, it's an extension of God's mercy. And limbo becomes the normative understanding of this until 1960-something. Vatican II casts a lot of doubt on it. And then you've got the International Theological Commission issued a document on limbo. I can't remember, in the 90s or the 2000s. And basically, the theological problem endures.
It persists, right.
It persists. But basically, as moderns, we just say, you know what? We are actually very comfortable just saying,
we don't know.
That those people, well, we don't. It's not that we say we don't know. We say that, we'll cast their souls upon the mercy of God.
Which means we don't know.
Yeah. But I think that, well, I'm not sure that document just says, I don't know.
But that's what they could have said. They could have just said, like, look, God's super merciful. We don't know.
They could have. I think the problem is that you're dealing with
I think it would have cleared it up a lot more if they had just said that. But from Dante's perspective, he doesn't actually add a lot of clarity because he has pagans going to purgatory and to heaven, right? So it's not like, oh, baptism is the thing, the dividing line here, because he has pagans also going to heaven who weren't baptized.
Yeah, he knows that God can act outside of the sacramental system.
Right.
So
Which I agree with.
So if you start reading Purgatory, right, they climb right out of literally a hellhole, and they come out the purgatory, and there's this guy sitting there. Do you remember who it was?
No. It was a guy who was like, should have been in hell, but he was like established as the governor of like the lowest ring. I don't remember who it was.
It's Cato. It's a Roman statesman. And what's even more, so it's a pagan. And he's right at the beginning of purgatory, which means that when everyone goes up through purgatory, he's going to be the last one. So the last person to go into heaven will be a pagan.
All the comments, the commentary is very debatable. Is like, oh, is he actually going to get in, or is he just assigned?
He's getting in
as like a punishment. You know, is he actually when it's all done going back down to hell? Right, it was unclear, and
he's.
I think he's getting in.
He's getting in because of how Dante.
He's not a ruler of the realm of hell.
Well, he's in purgatory, and everyone who goes to purgatory is going to go to heaven.
That's what I think.
But also the understanding of why. I think what's interesting is you're correct. Is that Dante will put pagans inside purgatory. He even has pagans inside of paradise. God can work outside his sacramental system, and so there's certain pagans then exhibit certain virtues that Dante then says merits for catechetical reasons. Again, just like you can't get wrapped around the axle on the Inferno being an actual map of hell, you don't want to get wrapped around the axle on why is this Roman here in purgatory.
Right.
I don't believe pagans can go. And cool it, take a deep breath, and realize what's the catechetical reason for him being there. The catechetical reason is, because we've kind of forgotten all these things, is that Cato didn't
he commit suicide?
Yes.
He did. He committed suicide. Yeah.
He's a suicide. Yes. Dante's brilliant. So for Cato is that Cato would rather commit suicide than live under the injustice.
It was the reason why he committed suicide that like it reminded me of like the seppuku like of the Japanese. I forget. I don't know. Like
oh yeah.
Like I do not say that word right. I don't even pretend to say that word right.
I don't think Adam or I had any doubts about
it.
that.
I've seen them.
I was like, oh yeah, that's definitely the correct
that's
pronunciation.
totally Japanese.
But I know guys because I've seen The Last Samurai with Tom Cruise. Okay, and I know about the sword stomach thing. Okay,
yeah, that's great. So moving on. So there's
but that's not suicide. When like in the like with that idea of Japanese, they're not committing suicide. They're like it's an honorable death. They were like defeated in battle, and their enemies, because instead of just killing them, their enemies are giving them this honor of this type of death. They're going to die. Who is it that kills them? It's the enemies. Okay, they chop their heads off. Right? But it's you know what I'm saying? There's a distinction here, and I think this is what Dante is sort of getting at. Cato kills himself.
Yeah, but why does Cato kill himself?
Because it's like he's gonna die, but instead I don't remember the exact specifics, but instead of like giving himself over, he would rather die like as a faithful servant than as
well. He'd rather yeah.
I mean, like
so
help me out because I honestly
would
don't
rather
remember.
die right under the Roman Republic than live under the tyranny of the new empire, right? Julius Caesar, because he's right there at that.
This is the weird thing about Dante, because like the blend. Well, this is one of the things.
A lot of weird things.
Because this is like the blending of sort of pagan mythology with Christian ideas. Because the as a Christian, we would say, no, you're not the master of your own fate. Right. You know, and like no, it's better for you to live according to God's will. God's will is that you continue to live. You know what I mean? He's not. Dante assuredly is not saying, kill yourself if like an oppressor is about to take over your country. Kill yourself and you go to heaven. That's not the lesson that Dante is trying to give here.
Yeah, Cato. I mean, there's a few things at work. I think one is that it's also particularly what Cato cuts himself open in his stomach and kind of tears himself open, and then his servants find him, right? Just because you nailed that earlier. So his servants find him, and then they mend him up, and then he wakes back up, and then he rips himself back open again. And
the
dies.
Entire staff of Babylon Bee did this when Trump lost the election.
Okay, and
in fact, they tweeted about it later.
That's good. So he actually makes this, sidestepping all that, he makes this beautiful phrase that he hopes that his blood will redeem the nation, right? He actually gives what, if you took it out of the context, seems to be a very Christological statement.
Right.
And I think that, yeah, Dante is trying to teach us something there. I think also, you mentioned earlier, is like Christians, what would we view? I think one thing that Dante has an assumption of that we've kind of lost is the providential role of Rome, right?
Right.
That there's that pagan Rome, imperial Rome coming together with Christian Rome, and this is the seat of both temporal power and apostolic power. Mm-hmm. And so for him, anyone who's connected then to a healthy understanding of Rome, what Rome should be, how this temporal power and spiritual power should be helping to govern us towards our final end, is going to be really high on the chart here for Dante. So even though Aristotle is the master of all who know, and he pulls from Aristotle more than anyone else, he's got several Romans that are going to end up being in purgatory, and I mean, he's got a Roman emperor in paradise as an example of a just ruler.
Right. Yeah.
Emperor Trajan.
But Caesar is in limbo.
Right. Which is the complicated understanding, I think, that the Republic, in certain ways, was superior, right? Was the Republic superior to the Empire, right? And so I think there's questions then about how Dante structures that, but because he tends to favor people who favored the Republic, right? You're like, oh, okay, but then he has an emperor in heaven. So it's a little murky, right? He understands that Rome needs to be the temporal power, right? He's in a fractured, broken Italy now that is, literally dying for some kind of unified deal. some kind of unified regime, right, government to help people move towards their end. And he critiques the papacy all the time for taking on too much temporal power, right? But arguably it's doing that because there is no centralized temporal power. And so, parsing out how he deals with the Romans is difficult on Republic imperial side. But at the end of the day, he holds Rome to be sacred.
And this is kind of what I was talking about before, where I said in the beginning when I was reading this book and people were talking about, oh, I think this is what he's meaning, like all these deep levels. And my initial thought was, guys, I think you're giving him too much credit here. But then the more you read, the more you realize, no, he actually is operating on all these levels. Like, no, it's not a stretch to say that this is what he meant. But
if I was any good at actually introducing the Inferno, we probably would have mentioned how to read it, which is right. So if I was any good at the topic that you invited me on, I would have mentioned that he actually writes a letter to his patron that you have to read the Inferno as you read Scripture, which is another reason it's a phenomenal book to read because
the four senses, right?
The four senses, the quadriga, right? Quadriga is a chariot with 4 horses, right? And so you've got your literal, your allegorical, your moral, and your anagogical, right? And he tells his patron, like, this is the same way that you read, right, the Inferno, right, the entire comedy. So,
okay, so I want to round out my own contribution here. It's still.
Have we started?
I started.
Okay.
Yeah. I got a lot of it out there because
the Japanese suicide theme, right?
No. No. The seppuku
is not.
No, something else.
I like you for many reasons. One of them is because I don't think you have any shame, but it's really good.
At least I'm very brave. I do actually have some shame, but I'm pretty brave. If I'm not,
you really do just sally forth out there.
I just, you know what? I'm not scared.
Right.
I'm not afraid to do it. But anyway, I still have this thing.
Okay.
Based on the church's definition, and once again, this is my own understanding of the church's definition of what limbo is.
Oh, we're back to this.
And I have learned that can be fallible. Okay. I have learned that sometimes my understanding is it's wrong. Okay. It's just wrong. But because it describes limbo as a place of natural happiness
to a certain degree.
And if it had said natural contentment, something like that, to me, like the word contentment would be more compatible with hell. It's not that things are bad, but you're content. But because it says happiness, that to me implies.
Does it actually say happiness?
I don't know. That's what I'm saying. Like, that's my understanding. Is
so I would.
I've listened to Catholic radio, and like I hear people talk about.
You listen to Theology of the Body as a child,
right? Exactly. Christopher West. I mean, like, you can blame him. I'm more than happy for you to blame Christopher West for anything that I don't understand properly.
We're moving on. So I think that So let me.
But you understand the difference between happiness and contentment.
I think that I think we're hung up a bit on happiness, and there's a few things that I think are worth noting.
Okay.
One is that Dante does talk about it. The phrase he uses, if memory serves, is untormented grief. Untormented grief. So I think that I'm just gonna hide my glass over here. So I think I want to be careful here that we don't put limbo
tormented grief.
I don't.
Who said? And
that. I think that's actually Dante's. If memory serves, that's Dante's phrase. He says he hears the sighs of untormented grief. So I want to make sure.
But to be fair, Dante. I'm sorry.
So
okay,
I think I want to make sure that we don't put limbo like in a vacuum, right? Because of kind of like how we would view a paradise on earth versus one that ends up being in hell, and kind of I think we're probably equivocating on certain things because there's two things that come to mind. One is that they are aware, at least in some way, that they are being deprived of the beatific vision.
Sure.
And it does not seem to me that you can be aware of that and have a perfect natural happiness. And so we need to make distinctions between imperfect happiness and perfect happiness, which is one we even make in our earthly pilgrimage, right? And so let's say, just for the sake of argument, that it is a place that has some imperfect level of happiness, right? I think there's two things that play into that. One is that they know they're deprived of the beatific vision. Mm-hmm. And so I think this is why one of the reasons that Dante talks about it as untormented grief, right? They weren't pulled up to heaven with Christ. They know in some capacity that they're being deprived of something. The second one is that the natural object of natural happiness is God. And so it seems difficult to me that even if they are free from all physical torment, I'd be really cautious about saying that people in limbo had a perfect natural happiness, because your perfect natural happiness has to satiate on God in your natural sense.
Oh, I wouldn't say perfect natural happiness.
Well, okay. So I think that they can have some kind of, it depends on what kind of word you want to use, because paradise can solicit, different things. But I think the point there is that it's a place in which, at least for Dante, because I want to stick close to a text that I've read on this lately, that it is a place where they suffer grief, but they are free from torment. And they certainly can have some kind of happiness, because you see them engaging in conversation. You see them welcoming Dante. I mean, there are delights that they can enjoy that are not, you're not privy to if you're in a different hell, or a different circle. And so, yeah, I think we can kind of parse this out, that we can't put them in a vacuum where it's like, oh yeah, they have, natural happiness, without really taking into consideration, well, they know they're deprived of their supernatural end, and there's no hope for it, which then is, by definition, right, hell. And then also the object of their natural happiness is God, and in a certain way they're even deprived of that. Or at least there's no way, in my, again, just kind of talking off the top of my head, there's no way that it seems that can be perfect.
Right. I mean, I think it's also important to remember that Dante is not seeking to write an encyclical, right? He's seeking to convey a truth, certainly. I mean, once again, he puts seemingly a canonized saint in hell, Saint Celestine V.
Yeah, I think that
he doesn't name him,
right,
which is good. If he had, the whole work may have been viewed with, it could have ruined everything that he did. But so I don't think that it's necessary to say oh, well, Dante says this about purgatory. I'm more concerned about what does the church say about purgatory, and admittedly,
you mean limbo?
Yeah, yes, limbo. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, limbo. So once again, I need to go and read the documents myself, because I don't know actually that the church says the words place of natural happiness. And certainly I would make a distinction between perfect happiness and just happiness in general. But to me, contentment is compatible with hell. Happiness is not, because on the one hand, contentment is there's just nothing negative about it. Happiness does seem to imply there are positive attributes associated with it. And you were bringing up which I think is a good point about, the people in in limbo, they're very aware that they don't have the beatific vision.
Just hard stop right there.
Right. Thanks.
But Deacon, you are also very aware that you do not have the beatific vision, and yet I would imagine that you're happy. You're more than content in this life. So to me, if we can experience happiness, true happiness in this life, more than contentment, and yet we ourselves are very aware that we are deprived of the beatific vision, how much more so for the souls in the eternal state, whatever those eternal states may be, that it seems to me fitting that. So my contribution, just so that we can finally get it on the table, was that
it'd be nice to articulate this with great clarity.
This is it.
That's great.
Okay.
So if you've listened this long, I'm gonna finally put it out there for you.
Wow.
Was that the limbo? There is this limbo of the fathers. There was the old limbo. There's a new limbo, which, in my estimation, is basically just for infants who aren't born, or for who die immediately after birth, whatever. Where it just seems unfair. You didn't even have a chance. It wasn't even physically possible for you to be baptized. Your parents would have baptized you the second you were born if they knew your life was at risk. Okay, like out of justice, it just doesn't seem fair, right? So, but how can we say that they're in hell? Or how can we say that they're in heaven? Because, yeah, you're right. How could they have the beatific vision? Well, I was thinking about it and said, well, possibly God's mercy is endless. Perhaps he has a purgation process for this particular limbo. What would that be called? Limburgatory. Limburgatory is my contribution. I want it trademarked, please.
Okay, so that's very good. So I think that
trademark Limburgatory.
So I'm gonna end on this because I
cannot believe we made people wait that long for
Limburgatory.
For Limburgatory. I tried to get it in. I tried to get it in.
You're using we as in we like.
Harrison kept making good objections and good side points.
Okay,
I was just trying to talk about Limburgatory.
I feel my contribution to tonight,
great cheese
outside of just kind of
also.
like leading us the blind leading
but
the blind.
I do feel like we had some good conversation. Adam, I'm not talking to you.
I think I said 3 words tonight.
Yeah, you were real quiet. You gotta help me out a little bit, would you? Just help me out a little bit. So I would just end on this because I always would be sensitive to I don't really want, in great contrast to some other things tonight, I don't ever want anything I say to be Harrison's great idea that he's coming up with, right? I want it to be the voice of the church. So it's not going to be satisfactory to like our conversation, but like in the Baltimore Catechism, which is, pretty good.
Yeah.
When it talks about limbo, right? It talks about actually where do persons go, such as infants who have not committed actual sin and who through no fault of their own die without baptism. So the answer it gives is persons such as infants who have not committed actual sin and who through no fault of theirs die without baptism cannot enter heaven. But it is the common belief that they will go to some place similar to limbo, where they will be free from suffering, though deprived of the happiness of heaven. So that's the closest we get to. That's the closest I know off the top of my head, besides Dante, to turn to get.
I think I'm glad you said that, because for me, the big hang up is the phrase natural happiness. I mean,
I think maybe instead of looking at it as a positive, right? Like, do they have happiness? I think there's probably maybe a more of a safe harbor to simply talk about the negative, which is that Dante and the Baltimore Catechism seem to be comfortable saying, which is that they are free
from suffering, free from the sufferings of hell.
Right. Torment, sufferings, even though Dante seems to allude that because there is grief and there's sighs, right? There's a certain type of suffering because they're in hell. Yeah. But it seems to be one without a contrappasso.
Based on what you just read, my natural reaction desire for removing limbo from hell, it doesn't exist anymore. Like, I need to go back. It does make me want to go back and read what the church has actually said. Because you said that they put something out like after Vatican II or something?
Yeah, the International Theological Commission took up the question of limbo and said, and has a whole article on it about, should that be the approach the church takes? And it was really after that document. I mean, limbo's not mentioned at all in the 1992-1994 Catechism, right? So that document particularly was kind of a death knell to limbo being discussed inside a modern theological context.
Right.
And so even to the point that if you try and bring up limbo in modern conversations and et cetera, people will talk about, that the church repudiated that in that document because it's not doctrinal per se, right? And so it's kind of it's the church and the saints for over a millennia trying to answer a difficult question, which is, what do you do with those who are not baptized, but it seems a great injustice to just throw them into hell,
into hell proper, right,
tormented hell. Augustine didn't seem to have much problem with it, but by the time you get to Aquinas and Dante, there is this understanding that no, there's this place of mercy they can go to, and that endures. I mean, the Baltimore Catechism, right, late 1800s. I mean, that endures for a long time,
right,
until actually just quite recently.
Very good. I will go and read that because I want my opinions to be informed by those things. Vastly more than my own,
namely the church.
Yes, exactly, the church. Even if it's not infallible, which I don't believe that the.
No, it's an advisory opinion.
I mean, exactly, it's not infallible at all. But those are the things that I seek to inform my own opinions on.
Right, which are always good to do, prior to voicing our own opinions.
Yeah. Look, I read Dante and I was like, no, I got an opinion about this. Okay.
Well, you've made that really clear tonight.
Limburgatory. It's for real. Limburgatory
It is
hashtag.
good.
It's for real.
Thank you, Deacon.
I always enjoy it. Thank you, guys.
Are we still recording?
You need to go straight, kill the stream.
Oh yeah.